basic questions. We have some basic questions that we'd like to ask, but as usual, this is an opportunity for our partners and in housing development to share with us their comments in kind of a more casual environment than a public hearing. So, you know, we fully encourage and would appreciate you bringing up your topics as we go along. From NIFA, I'm Sarah Takota. I am the allocation manager, and I know we have Pam Otto, who is the assistant allocation manager on the call today, as well as likely we'll have other staff, Robin Ambrose, Tammy from our compliance department, and others. But again, since we're all doing this 100% online, I believe today, I don't think we have anyone in person. Please raise your hand if you've got a comment. I know that that's a little trickier and it's difficult to sometimes have flowing conversations, but I think just so that we're not cutting each other off, it'd probably be best if we did that. So once you raise your hand, either Pam or I will unmute you and ask you to make your comment. And for those of you that did not attend the last meeting, Darren will definitely tell you that if it's silent, I may ask individuals questions. So I think with this group, we won't have that problem, but let's see. We'd first like to start out talking about the processes, and we changed so much during this last QAP, the 22-23 QAP. One of the challenges we're still seeing is, you know, even though we've changed it where threshold does not have any points any longer, either you meet it or you don't. One of the challenges we're seeing is several applications still not meeting threshold. And that was a comment that was brought up at a developer listening session with our board. And I just would like to hear from those who are practitioners in the program. Do you have any comments about, you know, what we could do to improve threshold? I've often said, do we even need it? But I know all of you really love it. So I just really like to hear any suggestions you may have. I mean, our goal is to have as many developments meet threshold as possible. And as to have the information we need to review, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we're not making it an overly onerous process. Anyone have any comments or suggestions to make changes? Or are you happy with things as they are?
Do I have to raise my hand?
It's this is Near Jaggerwell. Can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. I guess my personal view is I think the way threshold review is set up right now, I think it's fine. I think kind of given the opportunity where we get feedback on threshold items, which are fairly clear, and then the opportunity to kind of get clarifications from NIFA and resubmit, I think it's probably the best approach. So I guess as far as the way that's currently structured, I mean, maybe adding another week or so between threshold review and final application might be that kind of only addition or change I'd recommend, just in case there's a slew of threshold comments from NIFA, so a developer can talk through questions or ambiguities relative to comments from NIFA. That would be my only change, but I think the way it's structured right now is pretty straightforward.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Are we raising hands or unmuting?
It looks like we're raising hands.
Jake with Hoppy Development. I don't have much to add. I do think the binary nature, I think is generally, I mean, if there are certain critical items you guys think need to be in place, you know, removing those as points and making those, you know, either yeses or no's worked out pretty well.
The group at Mesner's.
Sorry, I'm looking for my hand to raise.
You're okay. That's fine.
Yep. I mean, if we put the points back, I mean, that does put a little bit more focus on, reward for getting the application in correctly. I guess it doesn't matter either way, but I think we're getting to where projects are getting so close that some differential points between the projects would be helpful.
And part of the reason that we ended up not doing the points anymore is that someone can submit the threshold applications, but then make significant changes between threshold and final. So it still means that the scoring team still has to review the whole entire application, and so many changes can be made. And we don't want to limit your ability to make changes, because obviously a lot can change between threshold and final. But that is one of the reasons that, we were encouraged to go that direction, just to give you some background for those of you who maybe are not aware of why we made that switch. Anybody else? And feel free to unmute yourself if you can't find your hand. Well, the raise hand button. Let's try that. Okay. The other major topic that we really want to hit on is the application timelines this year, where we made awards or conditional allocations fairly quickly back to back. But the idea is now we're kind of going into a bit more of a forward commit situation. So our 2023 credits were actually committed at the October board meeting. So do people like that timing? Is that making any difference to you? I know that it's been really only one full year of that, but is that something you'd like us to continue on that timeline, or would you like us to look at kind of going back to the way it was?
Go ahead and unmute yourself, Chris.
This is Chris at Mesner's again. Kathy's here. We're fine with where we're at right now as far as this most recent, change to get us on a timeline where we have the fall to work. The problem that we have run into is we have, from projects that were awarded the first round, we have only closed one project. And that was one without any other financing. It was just straight tax credits. So I think the schedule that we're on helps us. It's the other issues and hurdles and work that needs to be done in order to get the thing closed so we can start construction.
The timeline for, let's see, I think what you're saying, asking Sarah, is whether the timeline for the 2023 or is
Correct.
it 2024 credits?
Yeah. So we jammed everything together this last year because of having to go back out and do a little bit more work on the QAP. So the 2022, and then we did the 2022, and then we really quickly followed it with the 2023. Now our goal wouldn't be to do that maybe so much, but maybe to do the same timeline. We're having applications due late summer, awards in October, December, something like that, so that you have, I think October would be our ultimate goal, but so that you'd have time to work on, you'd know your schedule ahead of time, and you'd have time between October's board meeting and then, the spring.
And my feeling about that is I wouldn't want to do it any later than what we did the 2023 round this year.
Got it.
Even moving that up just a little bit wouldn't be a bad thing. Things have gotten so ridiculous in trying to get through our gap funding work and get release of funds with DED that you need to be giving us as much time as possible, or we need to quit using any DED funds. Because that's an absolute disaster there. So I wouldn't want to go any later than what we did the 2023 round this year.
Perfect. That's exactly what the kind of feedback we'd like to hear. Brent?
Yeah, I would second what Kathy said. If anything, it would be great if it was moved up a month or two to August or September award dates. Again, you know, if you use DED, home funds, trust funds, whatever, the process now is becoming so cumbersome that the October timeframe really puts a crunch on trying to get anything done to be able to start construction late spring. And when you're looking at construction, you really need to be out to bid in January, February timeframe, which is just nearly impossible to do if you've got other funding sources that you're using. It would be a little easier to get to that point maybe if the awards were a month or two sooner. I appreciate it being moved up to October, but if you're looking at dates that would work best, I think for the developers in the construction season and getting through the due diligence, I would move it up another month or two further yet.
Great, that's super helpful. One of the things we may end up doing is doing like we did this year, where we had one date and then we moved it up for 2025. So we might have to do 2024 in October if we can't. I mean, we want, you know, we're willing to work and try to make the schedule work work well for everyone. But time-wise, when we're trying to get the QAP done, I'm not sure, but we will definitely take a look at that and see what we can do to adjust that timing. Anybody?
Sarah, just to give you an idea, and the reason why Brent's trying to move it up, and I'm suggesting it, you know, it can't be any later than that, and probably should be moving up, is the release of the work to get done with release of funds used to take us 4 months or less. It's now we're now working on 10 months because of what they've been doing at DED. And so when you back that up to when your actual award date is, you can see why we don't want to have those awards come in too late in the year.
Understandable.
I mean, and Kathy, just to go off of that too, and I know we're talking dates right now, but it's almost worth giving a point or two in an application for not using DED funds. That's how bad it is.
Or 5 points.
I agree. You're going to get projects in the ground much quicker if you're not using the funds from DED.
Yeah, well, this will be an interesting conversation for us to have with our partner at DED, because as you know, Tony is our board chair as well as over at DED. So we'll make sure to have that conversation. Neeraj?
I just wanted to echo, Brent's comment, and Kathy as well. I think, as you noted, at least in 2025, if we could move up that date, and just logistically, if there was an August award day, for those who are ready to basically close within 90 days, it'd be ideal to kind of close in October, November, and avoid kind of a December year-end closing. And if there's 6 months left to close, you're looking at maybe a March start on construction. So I think there's a lot of benefits. Yeah, if at least for 2025, that could be moved up to August, I could see a lot of benefits for everybody.
Perfect. Thank you all. I appreciate the feedback on that. I'm hearing loud and clear. The earlier, the better.
Sarah, it's Chris. So are you thinking, since with the 2-year QAP, that you're going to do similar to what we did last year and basically have 2 full rounds within a couple of months of each other?
No,
or
ideally,
are we going to go back to 1 round in 2023 and 1 round of applications due in 2024?
so ideally,
24 and 25 credits.
yeah. So ideally, we'd want to do 24 credits at our ideal time, like what we can make work time wise, we'd want to do that. So it'd be the same as 2024's and 2025. Timing with getting the QAP through, I mean, we all learned last year what we thought and what we planned changed drastically. So, really, I'm not coming into this with a lot of, this is what we're going to do, this is how we expect to do it. But I got good feedback regarding moving the time up this last time. So, we just wanted to have that conversation to make sure that that was the direction that the practitioners want to keep moving it so that we're again doing it sooner than later.
So you're thinking a late, okay, I mean, ideally a late summer 2023 application for 2024 credits, and then a late summer 2024 application. So we won't have 2 rounds in 1 year again.
Yeah, I mean, part of
Okay.
me really liked that because some people were able to resubmit, but I don't know if that gives us if that gives enough time. So I mean, in the past, we kind of had it spread out where it was the same,
Yes.
every year. So I think that expectation is nice to have in place for you guys to know and to be able to plan your projects. And correct me if I'm wrong on that. But
No, I'd like to see 1 round a year because it takes us 8 months to get a project together. And if we're focusing everything on 1 round, that's going to be kind of hard. That's my opinion.
yeah, and again, last year or the 2023-20, I'm sorry, I don't know why I can't do it. The 22-23 QAP was just a result of having to go back to the drawing board and kind of start over on a certain level. So that's not our intent to do them back to back at all. But unless you guys all love it, and then we'll, we could talk about that, but that's not the message I'm getting. So, so scoring, one of the things that we've heard varied comments about, we've heard the reasonable development costs, ensuring reasonable development costs. We've heard from some developers saying, Nebraska is super efficient and compared to surrounding states, we often have, because of our efficiency measurements, instead of just setting a ceiling, that we have we use our credits wisely, or the developers use our credits wisely. So one of the questions has been, do we've had increase the importance of the development, the efficient housing production measures. We've had decrease them even more, leave them the same. I'm really interested to hear like the weight, how you feel the weight of those points are in relation to the rest of the application. And then also how those are calculated. Does it make more sense to use total development costs, less land and reserves, or like, is there a different way you'd like to see those looked at rather than just eligible basis?
This is Neeraj. I guess my initial thoughts on this efficient housing, I've been thinking about for a while and talked to in-state and out-of-state partners about how we approach it here. I think the intent is definitely valid and a positive one. I think the issue is that with this kind of efficient housing, with 2 of the categories, I think on a basis per unit and basis per square foot, I think fundamentally, while the intent is admirable, it's resulting in just cheaper looking projects. Just overall, I think just fundamentally to score high in those 2 categories, 2 of the 3, you fundamentally just need to have lower construction costs. That's really the target way to get that competitive scoring. And I think in turn, it's resulting in some projects, while they still look good, I think you might have developers veering away from additional brick and higher quality materials that'd be more expensive. And that's kind of resulting in an issue where, well, you might have a less expensive project overall in efficiency in the credit use. You're having projects that are, I think, really exacerbating the stigma of affordable housing, of having it look inexpensive and cheap. So I guess my personal preference would be, I think, keeping that 3rd component, I think LIHTC per occupant, because that's more to the efficient use of the credit. at getting rid of the other two. And I think it's just primarily that concern of, and I've heard from other partners I've talked to in other states, that, you know, their focus is on raising and elevating affordable housing by doing higher quality aesthetics and making it more safe and secure. And the concern is relative to that first issue, the two categories I mentioned, I think they're contributing to just, I guess, cheaper quality housing, because really that construction cost number is how you essentially really score competitively in that efficient housing category for two of the three. So that would be my recommendation, is to, I guess, get rid of two of those and maybe increase the points on the third category. Or maybe some combination with that kind of blended in with the leverage and collaboration, because that's also kind of an efficient housing approach too, I view, in some regards too.
Thanks, Neeraj. Turner?
I would agree. You know, I'm speaking more from the 4% bond side, but you know, one other variable that I think is playing into this is the scoring incentive for market rate housing. That encourages developers to obviously, you know, use more funds to create a comparable market rate unit to the new construction market rate units that are available. But on the bond side, I'm also using I'm using the very, very limited tax exempt bond volume to upgrade the quality of the market rate units potentially. So I think one way we could do this as well is eliminating the market rate incentive, and maybe substitute that with a income averaging suggestion. That way you're keeping the eligible basis up, taking advantage of the most amount of credits without wasting bond volume on market rate units.
Great, thank you. Chris?
It's Chris and I are in the same room, so it's Kathy, but
Mesners.
yeah. So the issue that I have with what's going on with the efficiencies is I don't think they've become very important anymore, because if you look at the projects that have gotten funded, the efficiencies are not really entering much into the efficiency scoring is not entering much into that. One of the things that I wanted to raise in the conversation today, and I guess this is as good a place as any, is that we've for a long time we've had this tug of war on our senior projects between giving extra points to seniors but turning around and taking them away when we do the scoring efficiencies, because the tax credits per occupant portion of the scoring efficiencies work against you in the senior projects. And so reducing the efficiencies to just that item, I think hurts us, and we need to be looking at this senior issue, because not only because I'm a senior, but because you know, right now 1 in 5 Americans are seniors, and by 2030, 1 in 4 Americans are going to be senior citizens, and we've got a massive bubble that's building there. And we need to figure out a way to deal with that within the tax credit scoring mechanism. And so I mean, I would be interested in the thoughts from those of you that are talking about going back to more efficiency points and how you think those could be weighted. But my, in particular, personal opinion is if we rely on tax credits per occupant, then we're damaging ourselves on this other issue. So I'll be quiet and listen now.
Jake? Jake, and then we've got Brent.
Sorry, I was on mute. I mean, kind of consistent with where we were before, I think, or some of the comments I've made previously, but I think right now you really are driven to either pursue an efficient project or pursue some other things that are very related to efficiencies, which are stacking subsidies, or, you know, incorporating other sources of funds, or looking at taking, you know, putting market rate units in the project. I mean, the biggest trade-off, I think even more so than construction quality on your ability to hit high efficiency points, is whether you pursue incorporating market rate units into the project. So I'm kind of left a little bit feeling like, well, there might be some tweaking.
Jake? Am I the only one that can't hear Jake?
I can't hear him either.
We can't hear you, Jake. We're gonna go to Brent, and then hopefully if your connection is back, we can raise your hand again and we can try that out. But Brent?
Okay, and just so everybody knows, Kathy and I did not get together before this meeting. But I agree with Kathy on the senior housing. It's more and more of a prevalent need. We're continuing to get more and more requests to do senior housing from the different communities out there. Lowering the efficiency points the way they were lowered allows senior projects they're a little more competitive now. But like Kathy said, the points you get for being senior housing, you lose in efficiencies because you're only building 2-bedroom units out there as opposed to 3 and 4 bedroom units out there. The scoring system right now seems to drive a lot more towards doing, 30, 40 unit buildings, and going vertical out there, which is not what a senior wants to live in anyway, from that standpoint. Some of the ways you can get there is like Jake mentioned, in market rate housing. But one of the other things I just want to throw out while I'm on here real quick to take a look at, because there's been some changes with HUD, is the points. When we get to it, I'd like to talk also about points for project-based vouchers. There aren't a lot of projects that get project-based vouchers, but it's my understanding moving forward. And Rob, you can help. You can probably, maybe you might have some information on this, working more in the Omaha area, that new guidelines are anything above 8 project-based vouchers kicks in Davis-Bacon. So when you look at the scoring and giving points for project-based vouchers, you may want from a cost efficiency standpoint, if this is actually true, and you or DED can look into it. If that's the case, is maybe cap the points you give on project-based vouchers at no more than 8 units. If it takes 10 units to get to 25% project-based vouchers, you may have actually hurt the project to get those points, because the Davis-Bacon wages is going to throw the cost up to where those points aren't worth it. So I just something to look at in the QAP process. And the points is, are there some new guidelines on project-based vouchers that would kick Davis-Bacon in and stay under that threshold?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Todd Lieberman.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Sarah. So I did want to talk about Davis-Bacon. I think because a lot of sources that have come into these deals, including CDBG-DR and some other entitlement funds, as well as project-based vouchers, do trigger Davis-Bacon, it does result in higher costs. So I think that should be taken into account in scoring efficiency. And I think there's a flip to kind of what the comment that was just made, and that, project-based vouchers, providing those, while it does increase costs, if you provide more than, I think it's 8 or 12, I can't remember what it is, in a project, it also provides permanently affordable housing to people who are paying no more than 30% of their income, with an operating subsidy associated with it. So it's a substantial benefit that I think is important, and the QAP should validate. The second thing is perhaps looking at, instead of eligible basis, per unit, maybe tax credits requested, because you don't necessarily have to request all of your eligible basis in tax credits. So a measure could be what you actually request, and that helps incentivize bringing another source of financing. And if the goal of NIFA is to, be as efficient as possible in use of credits, I think, just like it's done in the last QAP, providing some incentive to request less credits per unit would be a welcome change.
Thank you. Neeraj.
Yeah, just thinking about it further, and I appreciate the comments from everybody. I guess further thinking, I think, I mean, to the goal of making sure we're efficiently using our NIFA as best using the tax credits available, whether it's for 9% or 4%. I mean, my thought is actually, and the senior comments I think are very valid, is just, I mean, evaluating getting rid of the efficient housing. And I think, I mean, for me, I think it's maybe looking at adjusting the leverage and collaboration item, because I think that really speaks directly to the efficient use of tax credits by rewarding projects for utilizing as many other subsidies and kind of capital stack items as possible. And I think, I mean, the way it's structured, I think is a good approach right now, but I was thinking maybe, I guess, taking that further to say 20 to 25% kind of leverage, because I think it stops at 20% for 4 points. For 20 to 25%, you get 5 points, and then 25 to 30%, 6 points. And I think that more speaks directly to, the goal of ensuring that we're making efficient use of tax credits as possible. But I think that can get rid of efficient housing. I think really directly address the really just main concern I have long term is that it's, I think, again, an admirable approach to efficiency, but I think the indirect consequence is just basically promoting more inexpensive, kind of cheap looking affordable housing, which is feedback I've got from others too, and kind of discussing our QAP with other states.
Any other
This is
comments
Jake
on
again.
that?
I was gonna see if Jake got back.
Yeah, Jake got back. I don't know where I left off, and I can get a little long-winded, so I apologize. But I was just going to say, I think if efficiencies have forced some trade-offs between trying to pursue more efficient projects and trying to pursue some other programmatic outcomes. And so I think they're actually in a fairly good place there, or it's a reasonably elegant solution. I hear what the criticisms are of kind of the current system, but some of those suggestions I think would also create some interesting outcomes that, I mean, I don't know that we are exactly able to weigh. I think efficiencies really promote stacking incentives, so going out and pursuing those other incentives, much more so, I think, even than the incentive points. And I think you see that based on the few number of projects that actually received incentive points. The incentives really drive, scoring well on efficiencies. I don't know if that trade-off on construction quality is always as high. I think there's a trade-off on construction typology, so that, you're getting rewarded a little bit for your more efficient use of land in urban development. And then, I think it's really, a question of whether you try and remove units out of basis, and the question of whether, which I think is a valid one, whether pursuing credits for, incorporating the market rate is achieving what we hope it to, within that exact project, versus, if there's any way of contextualizing a development, tax credit development that's in a greater, project of market rate housing in some way, such that, if you look at an urban development scenario, incorporating 10% market rate units into that particular project is probably less beneficial to the tenants overall than potentially, locating that project in a high opportunity area such that it's surrounded by, market rate housing. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else before we move on?
Sarah?
Oh, yeah.
The other end of this, of course, is that the efficiencies also reflect, people bringing in gap financing sources. And so I think when you're thinking about the efficiencies and we're thinking in terms of the problems associated with the prevalent gap financing sources that we're having right now, we also need to think about that discussion as it relates to the efficiencies also. I mean, I hate to beat a dead horse, but the situation has gotten so intolerable that I'm just to the point where I just want to say, I don't want anything in the QAP that benefits projects that are using DED gap financing, because all it's doing is slowing us down immeasurably. And so I'm just making that comment. When you're talking about working with the efficiencies, we need to keep that in mind as well.
Thank you. I appreciate all the comments on this. It's something that we think about a lot. And we think about a lot of things a lot, but it's definitely something that comes up in conversation on a regular basis with our partners. So thank you. One of the things that we added in the last QAP was the track record exhibit. Everyone can be happy. We're not going to do that again. And Robin, I'm impressed if she's on here. She hasn't said I told you so. We're not going to do that. It was a lot of work for you with very little useful data for us. So a lot of times people would send it off and there wouldn't get much back. So we are going to at least remove that requirement of having to send out the exhibit to other agencies. We're not 100% sure what that's going to look like yet, but we do understand that was a lot of work for everyone, and the result was not terribly useful or helpful. So I just wanted to touch on that. And thanks, Robin, for not saying I told you so. Next, another huge change that we had is the metro versus non-metro. In the past, we scored those developments separately, but in the 50-50 split, I mean, points wise, if you were, if a metro could not, or a non-metro could not jump over a metro to get that 50-50 split. And so what we've done, or what we did this year, was really rotate back and forth between the two so that we could get closer to that 50-50 split for our 9% credits. And then we added the designated rank alternates in case credits are returned. So, I don't know, is there any feedback on that? Or, I mean, do we like the way that's headed to get us closer to that 50-50 split? Or, just any comments you may have? Silence, I'll say, means you love it. Don't change anything.
This is Chris. I think it's the fairest that we've seen as far as being able to be competitive. There's still huge discrepancies between Omaha and Lincoln and literally the rest of the state. So I like where we're at on that.
Okay, Brent?
I like what you did too. My only question would be the 50-50 split with the advent of the 4% credit being a true 4% and those being viable projects. I don't see a whole lot of 4% deals being done in rural areas. So should that split be 50-50, or should that split be a higher percentage of the 9% credits to the rural area? Since you have all the 4% basically going for the most part into the higher density areas. Aren't you really doing more units in the tax credit units in the urban areas than rural? Just something for everybody to throw out some controversy there.
Well, no, thank you for that comment, because it is definitely, you're right, the last two application rounds, they've been very much the 4%. We did have one project in Buffalo County, but otherwise, yes, they've been in more metro areas. Let's see,
Neeraj.
Marriage.
Yeah, echoing, I think the comments on the 9% side, I think, I'm fine with where we're at right now. I think the 50-50 approach is reasonable. I know other states use a rural set aside, but I think kind of what we've done with NIFA is a good idea. I guess my comments more, on the related issue of the 4%. Right now, I believe we have the one project per county approach. Looking at other QAPs in other states, while they do have for 9% projects and QAPs, they have rural set aside or some kind of geographic distinction. I've not found, and we've kind of talked to our partners at Nebraska and other firms, I don't think there's other states that have a geographic limitation relative to 4%. And really, I guess my primary comment would be, getting rid of a one project per county approach and really just having be merit-based and really relative to rural projects, just kind of giving the benefit that if you tie with a non-metro, basically a metro project, and there's no other rural projects been awarded a 4%. In that case, the rural project would get the benefit of the award. But again, my main concern with the 4% and the one project per county approach, I think it sets us up for deviating from a merit-based approach. Just because I'm looking at the scoring from last year, and I think going forward, you're seeing some projects close score around 56 to 60. And my concern is with that one project per county approach, if that remains, you could have situations where, projects that are scoring 47, 48 points and are getting awards when, they're, 5th or 6th or 7th highest in the scoring, but they're in a different county. And projects that are in Douglas County or Lancaster or Sarpy, wherever, they're in that higher threshold, closer to 58 to 60 points, and they're getting overlooked because of that rule. So that would be my primary comment, is essentially just having a merit-based approach on the 4% and giving a tiebreaker to a rural project if there's no other rural awards in a 4% scenario.
Thank you. We have that challenge with the amount of volume cap. We actually that one project per county only applies to the 4% tax exempt bond application with state credits. That's not the same on the 4% only side, just because we're very limited in that amount at this point in time of that state credit. So just to clarify, it's not that way on the 4% tax exempt bond only side. But thank you for that comment. Anyone else have any comments about the rural or the metro, non-metro split and how that's?
Yeah, Jake here, Hopper Development. The 50-50 was amazingly transparent for the purposes of preparing applications, and very helpful to have a more precise definition of how much credits were going to go and be available in each division. Just to Brent's comments, of course, there's going to be a disproportionate number of 4% projects in the urban areas, but there's a hugely disproportionate number of individuals in the urban areas as well. And I guess the way that we think about it is that, the traditional 9% really ends up serving a pretty different subset of the population than the 4% projects. So I wouldn't want to say that the urban areas don't need 9% projects because they have the 4% program. I don't think that's the right conclusion to take from that. And to Neeraj's point, it is challenging to know, there are certain advantages in Lincoln and Omaha and doing projects. I think your one per county really effectively means that Lincoln is competitive with Omaha. And I don't know how, but it also presents certain challenges. I don't have much to comment on other than that, I guess.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Rob Woodling.
Yeah, I would just echo what Jake said. I just did some quick math, and the counties, under the urban designation are about 60% of the Nebraska population now. So I think to go any less than 50-50 might not be appropriate for that percentage.
Thank you.
Chris.
I don't know where this shows up, but I'm looking for scoring categories. Currently, the 2 points and 3 points for rural community sizes, is great. However, I think some of that is getting offset by the disaster points. I'm thinking of, North Platte, Scottsbluff is under 15, Norfolk, some of the bigger rural communities, we have not seen just not been able to get any projects funded out there. If you go strictly on a scoring and what makes sense to go where, with us still having the disaster points and whether or not that shows up later. I don't know if it makes sense maybe to add, to bump up go from 5,000, 15,000 and 25,000 population, add another point for 15 to 25,000. We've got rural communities that are hurting for housing right now. There's job growth. And literally the answer to some of these communities is the way that the QAP is written, we're not going to get funded out here because we're competing with disaster points, and you're too big to get the small community points. But we're really hurting those $15,000 to $25,000 population communities that are really thriving, but are in desperate need of housing. And until those disaster points go away, they're not going to see any more housing out there, or rarely. So that can go whatever category you need to.
Well, and we don't have to stick to these categories. Again, this is your opportunity to share your concerns. So, don't feel like just because I'm going down an agenda, you can't bring up another topic. Does anyone else have any comments since we're on the disaster point? Does anyone else have any comments about the disasters, categories, the points, things like that?
Well, it's been over 3 years since that flooding. I think we need to move on. We may have another disaster today, so.
Yeah, this is Carolyn at Sarpy Housing. I know we've moved on, but the money has not been spent that's out there for disaster recovery. The CDBG-DR funds didn't come in until significantly after the disaster, as far as the floods from 2019 are concerned. My question is, the points were put out there, and I don't know if anybody from DED is on here, but the points were put out there and they were supposed to be used in the mid. So the areas that actually have seen the loss, and the majority of those dollars have gone to Douglas County outside of the loss areas. So anything that we can do possibly with disaster recovery that gives extra points to those mid would be great. We've had one project approved in Sarpy County, and Sarpy County is where the majority of the losses hit. And it's not weighted the way that there's got to be a way to weight these differently. And I don't have an answer for what that is. So I hate to bring up something without having an answer, but there's $18 million that's been spent, and $2 million of that's been in Sarpy, and Sarpy saw 80% of the loss of housing. So.
Thank you for your comment. I appreciate it. Anyone else?
And Sarah, this is Connor with Excel. I would echo Carolyn's comments. I mentioned it previous in the other QAP session and the NIFA board. So, my comments on that. Yeah, there's still $8 million of funding and possibly more. They're actually looking to switch into the housing program for the disaster recovery fund. So there's still plenty of money to go towards the housing. And my comment I made before was, to increase the points for those certain cities that got affected the most, that's in the QAPs by 1 point, or reduce the other counties by a point, is my comment I made previously.
Thank you. We have a hand.
And Jake from Hoppy Development, I also tend to agree. We have land where we could do a project in Fremont and it would score extremely well because of the disaster recovery points, but we haven't done it because we felt like Fremont has received a huge amount of affordable housing, and Sarpy County is not.
Thank you.
Are you
Um,
unmuted?
Yeah, you're good.
Well,
Kathy?
as far as that goes, you know, none of the money's been spent in Fremont either because we can't get it out of DED's control, so. What are we, 4 years down the road, and it'll be 4 years in March, and not a dime of that's been spent, so.
Sarah, are those points strictly, and I remember when these first came on, that it did not go by pulling up the disaster map off of the FEMA site and just saying this county. That I think when Tim was around, that there was the decision to some formula that had a calculation of a significant loss of housing. Are we still calculating it that way for this list, or is it strictly by disaster county as FEMA declares it?
No, I think I know what you're referencing, and that significant loss of housing is mentioned in this, but where we had the significant loss of housing, you needed to illustrate that was on the Crane side of things. If you were to come in on Crane, these eligible counties, you know, DED and our staff here at NIFA work together to look at these points. To be honest, I'd have to look back at our notes to remember all the methodology behind those, but we'll definitely discuss them with DED again, and internally to see, you know, your comments are very helpful. Everyone's are. We appreciate it.
So those three, the 3-point communities, Fremont, La Vista Valley, Gretna, Papillion, Springfield, Englewood, Waterloo, and Bellevue. You know, I would agree that, you know, you're going to target one of those to get those 3 points. Are we better off just going back to a county, going from 3 points and giving everybody 2 points in a disaster? That would, you know, take the focus off of those towns that maybe have had, like Fremont, that's had a lot of development, and other communities in those counties are not getting it because they're not on this 3-point list.
Very good comments. Thank you, everybody. Anything else on that before we move on? Okay. There were several new tactics that we put in place to meet the board's outlines, priorities, and goals for the QAP. One of those was leverage and collaboration, were some new points that were added. As was mentioned earlier, in 2022, we had several developments request and receive points in that category. But in 2023, we really didn't have that many in that particular category. I think some of that, you know, we're talking internally on what we can work on to make it a little bit more clear. Does anybody have any comments on the leverage and collaboration? And we have a hand.
Mesner's.
Shocker, I know. I've spent a lot of time on this, and I think Ryan is on. Some of us that have tried to navigate a couple things. One, what's eligible, what's not. I've got a housing, you know, the housing authority here put in $125,000, which definitely helps on efficiency points in that, but there was huge confusion on whether or not that would end, because it was technically a cash flow loan, which gets repaid if there's money left over, but doesn't get repaid. So there's some confusion on that. But the other problem is you're starting for 1 point at 5%. And I think that needs to be lowered. I know 5% sounds like it's sufficient, but on a $6 million project, you've got to have $300,000 to get that point. And again, I had a project where we put in $125,000, the housing authority did, and there's no credit for it, even though it helped us on credits. It reduced the amount of credit we asked. They had the money, they wanted to put it in. And we couldn't do that. So I would suggest maybe looking and seeing what some of your equity injections are on some of your projects and drop that 1 point category from 5%, maybe, take that down, starting it at 1% or 2% to encourage, especially the smaller projects, encourage them to use that and get that additional money in there.
Thank you. Neeraj?
Yeah, no, I agree. I echo John's comment. I think having a lower barrier for that first point is a good idea as we're evaluating kind of developing in smaller cities in Nebraska. So definitely agree there. And just reiterating my prior comment, I think this category, the addition, was a great idea. I think it focuses kind of on the earlier comment of ensuring the maximum efficiency for the use of the allocation credits. And I think it hits directly on that. I would just reiterate my point that, with larger projects, like we're doing the metro, I think combining especially historic and LIHTC and TIF and PACE and all that, I think adding additional scoring categories for 20 to 25% and 25 to 30% and making those 5 and 6 points respectively, or however NIFA wants to kind of carve that up. I think those would be welcome additions by me, just because we're always focused on, stacking as many sources as possible. So, and I think in future, we'll probably hit that 25 to 30% mark on some projects. So I think there should be a commensurate kind of point award for those kind of percentages.
Thank you. Turner?
Yeah, I'd like to echo exactly what everyone else has said, maybe even more so on the bond side. These deals tend to be a little bit bigger. And so coming up with 20% of the total development cost on a $30 million project based on the way the QAP is written is quite literally impossible. And if, at least on the bond side, if NIFA were to qualify things like the benefits of a TIF or potential private party soft loans, land donations, things like that, that way we can reach the same intent of, leveraging as many different sources as possible without restricting what the developer is able to do. I think that would help things out substantially.
Thank you. Todd?
Yeah, I would agree that maybe adding some more opportunities to just demonstrate leverage within this category, even if you have loans coming in to the project that are subordinate and cash flow dependent, it helps to provide more leverage that are non-tax credit leverage. Also, I would one thing I would like to see would be if in the market rate housing side and the leverage side, that there was some clarity on the policy related to twinning transactions that have tax credit and market rate deals closing concurrently as part of the same overall development. That's a strategy we've used and has been very successful. That I think would be needs to be explicitly included within this category. And then one other non-related topic, but one that is related to public housing transformation, whether it's through the RAD program or the Choice Neighborhoods program. When public housing is converted from public housing to project-based voucher units, either in the RAD program or Section 8 project-based voucher program, you're preserving those units in a different structure than they'd previously been in public housing, consistent with HUD policy for transformation. So within that category, I think it'd be nice to see some explicit recognition of that preservation.
Thank you. Anyone else on that on the old topic, the new thing that Todd brought up about public housing?
On a couple of those items, I would be very interested in hearing more about Todd's experience with how they've done some of the simultaneous close. I think we're very interested in that as well, or recognizing a more expansive ability to put affordable housing in market rate, context that gets beyond the 80-20 sort of construct. The leverage and collaboration, the threshold is very high. The way I've thought about it is, a community should probably be able to allocate TIF and have that count. And, usually TIF does not end up really being 5% of the development cost. So that's a very good baseline indicator of a community's sort of buy-in to a project. And typically that barely or doesn't meet the threshold. So lowering those thresholds would be great. And then just because I know there are some challenging properties in Omaha, Brinshore's looked at some of them, we're looking at some of them, and a couple of those are tax credit projects where they can't be resyndicated for the 20 years, which it's a controversial topic where we've been pretty close on one side of that controversy, but a number of the projects, at least in the case of Omaha's context, could probably be 4% bond projects and not take away from the 9% credits, and wondering if examining removing the 20-year resyndication requirement, if using 4% bonds with no state tax credit match, or if there's a transfer of the project. I mean, the reality is some of these properties are just hugely challenged as they are, and figuring out some way to get the resources to them that doesn't take away resources from other projects could be helpful. So sort of jumped around on leveraging off of his comments about RAD and some of the transition of the OHA properties specifically.
Thank you. That's helpful. Another hand. Let's see.
Todd
Oh, yep.
Lieberman.
I just want to say I second that the removal of that 20-year restriction. I think that really would help to address some properties that could benefit from a 4% federal resyndication. I thank you for bringing that up, because I think there's a real opportunity to do that through the RAD program.
Okay, a couple of the other items that were added this last year were points for a developer developing in housing in greater Nebraska. Again, the thought process behind that is our board is very concerned about making sure that we're encouraging developments, not just in our metro areas, but all throughout the state. Did anybody have any comments on that? We found that most did take advantage of those points, were able to. So we'll move on to the community housing initiatives tactic. Again, this kind of goes to making sure that, the board wanted to make sure that the community that you're going into also, things were happening. They were taking action, the community was taking action. Any comments on that? Ways to strengthen that? Or is that fine as is?
I guess, Sarah, a couple of observations on some of those new points. We liked the incentive to develop in rural Nebraska. I mean, it certainly has focused our efforts on making sure that we're continuing to work out there. The two sets of points that I wasn't totally sure how meaningful they ended up being were the non-metro proximity to services and the non-metro community housing initiatives. So I guess it would really probably preclude like a very small community, which maybe it would be precluded anyway but I think most communities probably could demonstrate some effort around 24, or I can't remember what the threshold was, but I'm just not sure that how many communities, if anything, came forward that didn't meet that threshold, such that it wasn't as meaningful as we hoped, or
yeah. So most So the community housing initiatives, where that is, you know, what's happening in that community, everyone was able to take advantage of those points in 2023. That was in the non-metro area, as well as in 2022. The proximity to services, you know, there were some that got full points, but usually there were a portion of the points, like maybe they weren't close to a library because maybe the community didn't have a library or something like that, or it was just farther away. So,
Got it.
I mean, we did see, it is a challenge to, again, you know, the areas of opportunity are important, but to measure that in, our board feels that that's important, but to measure that in, non-metro areas is challenging. And we're open to, you know, any feedback from your perspective of ways to look at that. Because we got the directive from the board and we're happy to do that and happy to try to come up with solutions, but it is challenging because metro and non-metro are so drastically different. So any suggestions on that, we'd love to hear. Also just the areas of high opportunity on the metro side as well. You know, we've heard loud and clear data diversity kids is not what we should be using. You're not happy with it. So we're definitely looking at different options, but we'd love to hear what you have, suggestions you have, concerns, anything like that.
Well, I can speak to the latter a little bit better. I don't know what would be good measures in rural communities, besides that don't preclude communities themselves. I mean, I think probably there are certain communities that are growing and thriving, and maybe some ways to measure that. You have some ways of measuring that, like whether they participate in the leadership community programs in the state of Nebraska. I don't know, you know, within like the city of Lexington, how you determine one, you know, area that's technically a 5-minute drive from another area as being fundamentally higher or lower. I think that's a challenge. I think that diversity data kids is certainly open to, or could certainly be subject of criticism, but I just don't know also what reasonable alternatives would be besides maybe looking at school districts, which really is, diversity data for kids is really looking at those sorts of elements. I mean, I think it's frustrating when you're looking at, you know, two census tracts that are immediately adjacent to each other, and one is a low and one is a high. I mean, that is confusing. But I think any tool there is going to be pretty imperfect. And the one benefit that you have with diversity data for kids is it's just abundantly clear which areas are in and which areas are out. And so if the purpose is to really focus and direct attention, it solves that mechanism pretty well, even though it may be frustrating along other dimensions.
Yeah, and you know, it's not just about schools. It is also health, and there's a health and environment score, and a social and economic scores that have a lot of different tools that go into that. But yes, transparency is important to us. So again, anything that we do, we'd want to make sure that anyone can go out, look at it, find it, so that you're not guessing as to what your score may be. Chris Mesners?
On the non-metro proximity to the services, as long as you're in a community that's 3 miles by 3 miles, you're in good shape. Again, I look at a community like Seward or some of these other communities that are larger than 3 miles by 3 miles, yet have all of the services within literally a 5-minute drive. Will direct your developers to go to certain communities and avoid other ones. So I don't know why what the magic distance is, but I think some of those points are precluding some communities again that need the housing that we're so far away. And if you look, to be a half a mile away from a public park or a library, most of the communities that we're in, rural or urban, more so rural, there's no available land. I mean, those communities are established to where you're a half mile away. You're just not going to get those points. And maybe that's being used as a way to stretch out points, and some are going to get it, some aren't, but it is precluding some of your larger communities that are bigger than 3 miles by 3 miles to be able to get those points with a successful project. I just don't know what the, you know, do you go 5 by 5 or do you say, you know, within city limits? You know, good luck.
Thanks. Anyone else before we move on? Okay.
I would just say one quick thing, which is, and this may have to do with how you draft it, but being able to demonstrate in an urban area access to services and amenities is important, because it may be very different than the way, again, that this software program we used last time did it. So an opportunity for a narrative description and a map showing, you know, access to services and amenities in an urban area, I think would allow for a greater variety of services that are applicable in those areas.
Okay, thank you. Family development. One of the board's priorities definitely was talking about encouraging development for families. You know, as well as that eventual transition to home ownership. So, you know, we added some points for family units. We didn't have a ton of people take advantage of those. Again, you know, we'd love some feedback on that, the size of the units, the percentage, you know, any feedback you have regarding helping, you know, again, serve families as well. That'd be great.
Neeraj.
Yeah. So on that note, yeah, I mean, first, I think the 4-bedroom kind of points there, I think was a good idea, and I think it's a positive move to ensuring more developments that are focused on families, particularly large and multi-generational families. Relative to that, I think one comment I would make is maybe adding or tweaking that to basically say, I think right now it's structured as 1 point for 10% of your units being at 4 bedrooms or more. Maybe adjusting that and saying maybe similar to the gross rents, how that was changed. You know, you can get up to 2 additional points, so 3 points total if 50% or more of the project consists of 3 and 4 bedroom units. So on top of that, 10% for 4 bedrooms, maybe 40% or more of the units are 3 bedrooms. And I think, I mean, that's primarily just, I think we'll speak to and hopefully encourage more projects that have those kind of 3 to 4 bedroom units that are ideal for larger families. I mean, we ourselves are focusing a lot more on row house projects targeted at families in the metro and going forward in non-metro areas. So I think that would encourage that. But I guess on that, and kind of really specifically to the 4% program, on the issue of kind of larger projects and those with, you know, 3 and 4 bedroom units, we're, I guess, really, I know it's really a coordination issue with the governor's office, but to the extent possible, on the federal LIHTC only side for 4%, if there's possibility of increasing that 35 million upwards to 55 million on volume cap. And just, I just mentioned that, and limiting, I guess, increasing the limit, I think it's 22 million right now to maybe 28 million for volume cap per project. And just, I think we had talked about before, Sarah, I think a while back, I mean, our goal kind of specifically is to focus on federal LIHTC only 4% projects, in addition to some 9% projects. So we're not kind of competing for those state LIHTCs that are needed for 4%. And with that, we found typically, in order to make it 4% LIHTC project only work, even with TIF and PACE and other kind of financing involved, we need to be at least 50 million overall project cost, and kind of units that are project development that's around 180 to 200 units. So I've actually got a project right now that's we're teeing up for next year that's around 55 million and 195 units, a mix of row houses and apartments, and that will work very well even this with the current interest rates, but that would probably require volume cap around 25 to 28 million. So I just note that because I mean we want to focus on that kind of project going forward, but I think we'd need some adjustments to the QAP, the volume cap limit on the federal LIHTC only side, and hopefully overall increasing that 35 million to 55 million as well. So we can do more of those federal LIHTC only projects.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah,
I would
Sarah-
agree with, oh, sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Kathy?
Oh, just oh, sorry, Kathy.
No, I don't care, but just to get it out of the way, you know, from the moment that the board decided family development should be incentivized, I've been saying that's wrong, and I think it's something that the board needs to consider, and I think Chris Lenz came down and visited with them a little bit about the demographic information on senior housing, which we've talked about, but it's not just the senior housing that's stressing the housing industry. It has to do with the fact that our household size has shrunk dramatically. And if you look at that demographic, building units that are 4 and 5 bedroom or incentivizing units that are 4 and 5 bedroom sizes doesn't make any sense either. And so I just think we need to take and we need to ask the board to take a hard look at those demographics and say, is this where we ought to be putting our incentive points?
Yeah, we're gonna pull together some data on that because, you know, to break it down to how many projects have been awarded that were senior projects, and just try to really give a general idea of how those are, you know, I think this last year we had, I think it was 2023, we had several of the projects, or a good portion of them, that were senior and non-metro. But you know, yeah, we're definitely looking at that. I mean, as you know, it's something we talk about every single year and something that, you know, we'll continue to look at. So thank you for that.
Well, don't just look at the senior data.
No, we won't.
For what we're building, but look at the senior data, demographic data, plus look at the household size demographic data.
Agreed. Jake, and then Thomas.
Thanks. I generally agree with the opportunity to get as much bond volume cap as possible, especially in sort of the next, say, 36 months, where we've had a lot of different soft funding sources from ARPA and otherwise come into the program, as well as some different projects that I think could be feasible at just the 4% level. I think we can get a lot. There were a number of projects that were applied sort of anticipating being straight 4% projects. I think Annex Group in Lincoln, our project in Lincoln, and some others, such that I would hate to be competing for 4% volume cap that didn't require the state tax credit match when all of these projects are feasible. So anything we can do to make sure we're not running into a volume cap issue. And then regarding project size, I can't comment as much on that. Our project doesn't require that, but I could definitely see that being an issue that Neeraj is bringing up too. And on the family side, I don't know what the right answer there is. I do know that we certainly oriented our developments to incorporate a small number of larger units to meet those requirements so that we could provide those. And if that's what we think the community needs, I think the point was effective in turning our attention to that and including those in projects we otherwise wouldn't have.
Thank you. Thomas?
Yes, thank you. From a housing authority perspective, the Lincoln Housing Authority, it's been mentioned to me that they would love to do all 1-bedroom apartments. I guess there's that much of a need. And then I know Chris Lamberty has mentioned to me, who's the executive director of the Housing Authority, is that from the Housing Choice Voucher Program perspective, a vast majority of those vouchers are being utilized by households that would require less bedrooms than the 4 bedrooms. I think it'd be the 1, 2s, and 3s, but so that's just from a perspective of the Housing Authority. And similar to what I think Jake was mentioning, I mean, Emerald View, the project that we were fortunate to get credits on for this year, I mean, we had to pivot a little bit because I felt like we needed to pick up some of those points, and that was one way of doing it to 4 bedrooms. So.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, Tyrese with a True Purpose founder. Just speaking in general to the family housing, I think the families are growing bigger. I think there's such a need for the 4, 5, and 6 family members to really have the opportunity to have family housing. So I think the volume cap, just to echo what Neeraj was saying, has to be higher so that we can build those larger family units.
Thank you.
Didn't Todd Lieberman
Yeah.
have his hand up?
Yep, Todd.
Sorry, I lowered it prematurely. So what's interesting is our experience with the Omaha Housing Authority has been that actually they've got a lot of large families within our transformation projects we're doing with them. And I just think that we can't forget about the fact that, you know, families are still living in cities and in rural areas, but in cities. And if, you know, and we should do what we can to support them as well. So I see a strong need for family housing still with the work that we're doing. And then bond cap, if it could be increased, I think it would allow, you know, for a lot of opportunities to do 4% credit deals, you know, with all the good amount of soft money coming in, both from the state, federal level, it will allow more housing production to occur. So this is really a moment when increasing the amount of bond cap for multifamily production comes with a lot of leverage, and with interest rates high and credit pricing a little bit lower, we really need to do what we can to get this work done. So I hope that we can support more volume cap going towards housing production.
I know that Shannon's made it clear that, you know, she's in support of us making sure that we're prepared to work with as much volume cap as we have available. So you know, she feels pretty strongly about that. So Turner.
I would agree with the conversation about hopefully increasing the bond cap, and I know that you guys are doing everything you can to keep these funds as high as possible. So I'm sure I'm not the only one that's appreciative of that. But I would suggest that when you're writing up this QAP, include some language that if the 50% test were reduced during the period of this QAP, that there wouldn't need to be some sort of amendment that would say, essentially, if that test were to be reduced to 40 or 30 or 25 even, that it could be a smooth transition for these bond applications.
Thank you. We are closing in on our last few minutes here. Supportive services. I know we could probably talk a whole hour on supportive services alone. We will start with supportive services next time at our next session. Does anyone have any other topics that they'd like to see discussed that we didn't bring up? And we'll make sure we, Chris.
You think we covered it all, didn't you?
Nah, never.
I'm gonna come back with my annual request of getting rid of the affirmative marketing plan as an exhibit. I try every year. That's a HUD form. I don't understand other than that's what we've always done. I don't know what information NIFA uses in reviewing the information in there. It's a time-consuming form that, I mean, I can understand once we get a project approved, that if we're using home funds that, you know, obviously that is a part of what we need, but I don't understand the need for it for any reason for the NIFA application, you know, just to get the award. I don't know what information we're providing you that's making us a better project.
Sarah, I have another thing for your agenda for next time, and I'm not sure I'll be on that call, but there are a slew of bills in the legislature dumping money into housing, or proposing to dump money into housing, some of which is is intended to come to NIFA, some elsewhere. But I think it might be helpful to at least have a little bit of a conversation about some of those bills and which ones we think might have some chance of being successful in the legislature, and how that might impact what you're doing with the QAP, in terms of, you know, what other funds may be available to us to take some of the pressure off the tax credit program. So that might be a worthwhile conversation to also have.
Thank you. We met with the staff of DED earlier today, and that was one of the things that we talked about, was everything that's going on out there and all the funds that either are available or could be available, and what we could do to really be flexible and be ready in regards to the QAP. So we'll make sure to add that to the conversation. Anyone else have anything that they'd like added to the agenda? We need to discuss a little bit more next time.
Sarah, this is Connor with Excel. I'd just reiterate comments I've already made in previous sessions, just to redo how the rehabs are scored. I don't think it was NIFA's intent to not have any rehabs scored when they made the changes, but we can talk about that more. And I've made comments on and shared with you on how to change that. So
yeah, thank you very much.
Yep.
We appreciate that. Okay, well, on that note, next week we will have our last session, I believe, in regards to a focus group. So we look forward to seeing anyone who would like to attend. Again, the sign up is on our website. We will, as long as the weather is decent, we will meet in person as well. But again, thank you everyone for taking time out of your day. I know that all of you are extremely busy, but we really appreciate your feedback. It really helps NIFA and the DED team, try to do our best on the QAP to meet the board's goals, but then also make sure that we're looking at this from a real world view as well, so it's not overly cumbersome for the developers. So thank you, and look forward to seeing all of you next week.
Thank you. Thanks.